All right, this is the beginning of notes for the unit on biological basis of behavior. So this is our biology unit, and it is modules 9 through 15 in your textbook. If you're watching some later videos, they may say different modules. It was from a different book. Still same information though. All right, so to start us off with, the beginning of this unit has to talk about neurons, because neurons are the basic building block of life. So neurons there are tons of neurons within you. There's tons of neurons in every single animal or living thing. And for humans, we can talk about, there are three basic types of neurons. The first type is what we call sensory neurons. And sensory neurons are going to be any of the neurons attached to, as you might guess, our senses. So what is attached to our, for example, our sense of taste, touch, smell, vision, hearing, okay? All of those bring in information into us all the time. So that information that's coming in is through our sensory neurons. At the same point in time, we also have what we call motor neurons. And so motor neurons are going to be the ones that actually make you move around. They send the information out there telling you to move this or that body part. Okay? So for example, as you might guess, I'm very much a talk with my hands person, so right now my hands are moving because of my motor neurons. And in between the two are what we call interneurons. Interneurons are in your brain, and they are the ones that take the information from your sensory neurons and basically kind of pass it on, the information on to your motor neurons that tells your motor neurons to move. Okay, so this is a good visual. You have sensory neurons, you have information coming in, signals coming into the brain. Motor neurons are signals coming out of the brain telling you to move. So, for example, if I'm seeing this hot pan here, maybe I go to pick up the handle, okay, and my sensory neurons are telling me, go and tell my brain that this is a hot pan, which the interneurons will then take that and pass it to my motor neurons and move my hand away, right? So, sensory neurons taking information in, interneurons passing that information on to the motor neurons, which will then move my body parts. Okay, so last thing I wanted to talk about in here was neural communication. How do we actually communicate with our neurons? So, neural transmission. How does the neurons communicate with each other? Well, to start off with, when it's initially at what we call our resting potential, the neuron has what we call positive ions on the outside of the axon and negative ions on the inside. So, what this actually looks like. So here is a picture of our neuron. So in class we did a little demonstration on the different parts of the neuron, and this actually has a couple things labeled that we don't really need to know. But here's what happens is when we have our neuron at resting potential, we have positive ions on the outside and negative ions on the inside. So basically what we're doing here is that maybe we have all of these negative ions inside this axon here. Okay, so these are really small, I'm drawing. You get the picture. And on the outside we have all these positive ions. Okay? So we have all these positive ions on the outside. And when it looks like this is what we call our resting potential. Now you'll notice that I also have a picture of dominoes up here. So the domino thing is going to be, I'm going to use that as my analogy. Okay? So my resting potential is when my neuron is ready to fire. Okay? And it's sitting like this waiting for a message. When I'm using the dominoes as my example, when I have all the dominoes lined up and ready to go, if you've ever played with dominoes and you hit the first one and it hits all the ones after it, that's what I'm talking about. When you have all your dominoes set up and ready to go, that's our resting potential. Okay? Now, what happens is that there's a response to a signal. There's a signal that happens from another neuron, an electrical charge. This is what we call our action potential, and it's going to pass on the neuron. So what happens is the dendrites, remember, are receiving the message from another neuron, not on the screen, and this electrical charge will pass through this neuron. For my dominoes, I hit that first domino, okay, and the action potential travels down the rest of the dominoes. So what happens though is that each section of this axon, and you'll notice that they kind of look like little sausages on this model, and that's truly what they do look like. But what happens is that the sides basically of each section of the axon become permeable, and all of a sudden we have what we call depolarization when we have the action potential travel through. So we have this message that goes and it gets from the dendrites, goes through the cell body, and then it hits the axon, right? And so then all of a sudden, the sides, all of a sudden stuff can pass through, and what depolarization will happen means is that all of a sudden you will have where it starts like this, and then what will happen is that all of a sudden you'll have positive ions that will come on the inside. These are very tiny to draw in the middle, and you'll have negative ions going on the outside. Okay, and so depolarization is that basically the sides of that part of the axon will all of a sudden kind of allow the ions to pass through it, and so you'll have positive on the inside, negative on the outside. And when it happens like that, it'll trigger the next kind of little section of the axon to depolarize, and so then this section will have all of a sudden the positive ions will come on the inside and the negative ions will go on the outside. So then, after they depolarize, okay, as that action potential travels down the axon, each section will eventually reset itself. And this is what we call a refractory period, where it'll take time to get the ions resituated. And so maybe we're down on this end and we got positive ions on the inside and negative ions on the outside. By the time it gets here, all these ones at the beginning are back to where they should be, where the negative ions on the inside, the positive ions are on the outside. Okay, that's where they eventually will be. Okay, so the time it takes to reset basically is our refractory period. So going back to my dominoes example, my action potential is when I flick that first domino, right? So when I have them set up, that's my resting potential. I flick the first domino, that's my action potential, okay? It will hit every single domino along the way. That's my depolarizing. And then when the time it takes to be able to reset them back up again so I can knock them all down again, that's my refractory period. So the action potential, though, only happens when a minimum threshold has been met. So I have a certain amount of basically pressure that I have to put on that first domino to be able to get it to move and be able to trigger the rest of them. So there's a minimum amount of pressure. Same thing with the neurons. There has to be a minimum amount of stimulation to the dendrites in order to be able to get the whole process started. Okay? And neurons have what we call an all or nothing response. The strength of the stimulus just affects how many neurons are fired. Meaning, for example, going back to my example of the hot pan, you know, it doesn't matter if that's just a very warm pan or a really scalding hot pan that's going to give me like third-degree burns here. It doesn't mean that I'm going to increase the speed of how fast that message gets passed along in my sensory neurons. It just means that it affects more neurons, right? So it either you have the threshold or you don't. Okay, it's either hot enough for the message to be passed along to my motor neurons to move my hand, or it's not. Okay, all right. In class, we are actually going to talk about another demonstration. I did the demonstration, I will do the demonstration in class about the dominoes, but the other demonstration is we're going to take a little mini field trip to another part of the building. We're going to actually go to the bathroom, and we're going to use the toilet as our example of how neurons communicate. So I want you to think about that and how the different parts or actions of the toilet can demonstrate the resting potential, the action potential, the depolarization, the refractory period, the threshold, and the all or nothing response. All right, let me know if you have any questions.